So, please. Mm-hmm.
That burns away all the things, the three options that Dr. Mattia
Mm-hmm.
explains. Can you please re-explain to us?
Yes. Okay, it's a slight, we can say it's a slightly technical thing. So the question is, the question posed is, the Buddha said that karma is not destroyed until you experience it. How does this square with this idea that in one moment Bodhicitta can burn even terrible negative karma? How does it work? The first solution is, true, it doesn't literally burn it. So it doesn't literally destroy that karma, but it makes it impossible for that karma to bring out its result. So it provides an antidote, which is such an amazing amount of merit, since he will explain this later more in detail, but the idea is that Bodhicitta produces infinite merit, even moment by moment. One is producing, in one instant, one produces as much merit as there is space. So when you compare it to that amount of merit, whichever karma one might have produced is just like a very small quantity of salt, which we might throw in the ocean. If we take a very tiny quantity of salt and we throw it in the ocean and then we taste the ocean, probably it doesn't make any difference. So similarly, this negative karma doesn't have the occasion to bring about its result because it's overcome by this amazing quantity of merit. So this solution does not require for that karma to really disappear. You see? So that's the first solution is the karma is not really destroyed. It's just that the conditions are changed so that it will never have an occasion to bring out its effect. That's the first solution. Second solution is that we rethink the context of when the Buddha said that no karma is destroyed without experiencing it, which is, whom did he tell this to? He told this for people who do not have the method of Bodhicitta. So since this was addressed to them, we can say that if somebody has the method of Bodhicitta, which he explains more in detail, means thinking that I will remove or I will rescue sentient beings which go as far as space from any suffering, and I will give them all happiness. And then he also does the confession. So the purification practice, the confession is done by seeing that the karma, the negative karma is negative, and then not having the resolution not to do it again, etc. All of this makes also the ability of that karma to give fruit less. But all of this together has this ability to actually destroy that karma. So according to the second solution, that karma is in fact destroyed. The third solution is that this is said only in respect to certain type of karmas. So there's two types of karma, one which has a fixed maturation, a sure maturation, and one whose maturation is not sure. So this is only in respect to the karma of non-fixed maturation. While even if one develops bodhicitta, the karma of fixed maturation is going to be experienced. So that's the first solution, which takes this statement not to be literal. See how these solutions work? The first solution means we don't take the word burns out literally. The second solution is that we don't take the other statement of a Buddha literally. And the last solution is that we don't take this literally in the sense that it doesn't regard all types of karma. So these are the three solutions. How do we meditate about bodhicitta? Oh, okay.
On this related subject, I have this question. We know that any being will have created immeasurable bad karma over beginning of time. Then how is it possible in this very life here you can become an arahant? Because to me, to become an arahant, you've got to exhaust all negative karmas before we can become.
That's a mistake. If you had to do that, nobody could get liberation. Yeah, but the point is that negative karma does not have the ability of projecting a new birth if one has removed the mental defilements. To have a new birth, one doesn't just need karma, one also needs mental defilements. So if somebody is free from mental defilements, then that karma is not a sufficient condition to get a new birth. So there is no need to exhaust all previous karma in order to become.
As you are no longer ignorant, as in our Buddhist sense, then you don't come.
Yes, and yes.
Because of the dependent origination.
But it must be that all the defilements are really completely uprooted. Now then, there is, if you want to be more precise, there's actually this debate. As you know, there's this idea of whether everyone has got Buddha nature or not. So the other side of this debate is, are arhats really liberated or not? Because if everyone has got Buddha nature, it means that arhats are not really liberated, because otherwise they would not have the opportunity to become Buddhas. Right? So then the question is, what is it that keeps the arhats in samsara? That's the question. And there, the answer is the vasanas of the kleshas. So the arhats are completely free from kleshas, from mental defilements, but they still have the trace of those mental defilements. So the example given is that the stories of arhats who used to have very strange behavior because of this trace of mental defilements. They didn't have the defilements per se, but they had these traces.
You mean the habits?
Very subtle traces. Like, I forgot, there was one arhat who used to jump like a monkey, for example. I think there was a female arhat who used to wear makeup, for something along those lines. So there's stories which show that certain habits remained in the arhats. We never find something like that for the Buddha. And another way to understand it is that they do have a certain type of ignorance. And this is accepted even by non-Mahayana philosophers, because there's two types of ignorance. One is called afflicted ignorance, and one is called non-afflicted ignorance. So, to give you an example, if one has afflicted ignorance, it means that if I look at that seat, I might develop raga, attachment, aversion, and ignorance. If I have removed that type of ignorance, if I look at that or I think of anything whatsoever, I will not develop any of it. But I might not know if somebody asks me, how many leaves are there on the trees right in front of Tansiang? Then, if I'm a Buddha, I can give an answer. If I'm an Arhat, I cannot give an answer. Because I have a non-afflicted ignorance. It's a type of ignorance which does not cause afflictions, but it's still a type of ignorance. It's an ignorance in the sense of not knowing certain things. So, for example, the difference is that there's a limit in terms of how far one can know, in terms of space. So, the Arhats can know things up to a certain distance. The knowledge of a Buddha is infinite in terms of space, also in terms of time, and in terms of small roots of merit. So there's an example. Maybe it's actually the last monk ordained by the Buddha, but I'm not sure. I don't remember very well the story. We should check. This potential monk was, I think, even an elderly person, maybe. And he went and he met one of the great Shravaka Arhats and asked, can I become a monk? And this Arhat looked into his mind stream and said, no, you can't. Because he thought he didn't have even a small root of merit, which would be sufficient to obtain the Upasampada. Then he went to the Buddha, and the Buddha said, so who came? And he said, well, such and such a person came and asked to become a monk. And he said, call him back. And the Buddha gave him pravrajya, he made him into a monk, because he could see a very subtle root of merit that the Shravaka Arhat was not able to see. So that's something else that only Buddhas can see. And lastly, another point that only Buddhas can see is all the causes and conditions that can bring about a certain phenomenon. So, for example, it said, if you look at a peacock, the peacock's tail has very striking marks. Only a Buddha knows all the causes and conditions which bring about those striking marks in a peacock's tail. That's the example given. Nobody else, except for a Buddha, knows all the causes and conditions for any phenomenon. Arhats know some, but only a Buddha knows that. So, a Buddha doesn't have any form of ignorance. That's a special quality of a Buddha. And so the point is, does that kind of non-afflicted ignorance suffice as a cause for samsara, for example? Or does one need the realization of emptiness to obtain liberation? That's another point. So in the Bodhicharyavatara itself, it is explained that if somebody takes the four truths as a point of reference, if one meditates in that way, this is still not a cause of liberation. Because it is said, a mind with a point of reference will get stuck here or there. So, therefore, one should develop the view of emptiness. Then, of course, there's a different question. Do Arhats understand emptiness? To what extent? And that's another long discussion. But I hope it answers your question. Okay. Depends whom you ask. That's the point. If you ask somebody who believes in Buddha nature, they will say yes. If you say somebody who does not believe in Buddha nature, they will say no. the people who believe in Buddha nature say that, yes, arhats will be reborn again because they are actually in a very deep state of meditation, and eventually they will have to come out of that state and start on the Bodhisattva path and become Buddhas. So, according to the view of Buddha nature, only a Buddha is outside of samsara. According to those who don't believe in Buddha nature, for them an arhat is completely liberated. Yes, yes. For Theravada, for Vaibhashika, for Sautrantika, and within the Mahayana tradition, for Yogacara philosophers. But some Mahayana philosophers, like Madhyamaka philosophers usually, and most of Chinese schools, for example, as well as most of Tibetan schools, they believe in Buddha nature. So from that perspective, then, yeah. They're all, those are all intermediate stages, even from the perspective of non-Mahayana. They're not liberated. They're noble ones. But a noble one and a liberated person is different. A noble one means that, with slight different explanation, but it means somebody who has understood at least very directly the nature of selflessness. But just realizing it is not that the moment one realizes selflessness, the person is immediately liberated. It's not like that. One still needs to cultivate that realization. Yes, but I think they still need to obtain the actual nirvana. So at that point, they're still within samsara. It means they will not take a new life, but they have to obtain liberation in a specific state. So they have not yet obtained the completion of the removal of the afflictions. No, I think no. No, lower realm, from Srotapan onwards, it's impossible. Actually, I think that as long as one has obtained worldly correct view, Laukika Samyak Drishti, one will not go to the lower realms, according to most explanations, if I remember correctly. And according to some, even just taking refuge can avoid that. Refuge protects from the lower realms. So, not going to the lower realms, one can achieve through different ways, but between that and being completely free from defilements, there's many possible stages. Or rather, their wisdom. They're waiting to exhaust their realization. So when they are completed their realization, and the mind is completely purified from klesha, then they are called arhat. The arhat doesn't have any klesha, any mental defilements anymore. So as long as there are small traces of attachment, aversion, and delusion, up to that point they're not arhat.
You're mentioning that the arhat, after the deep rest, they will be back to walk the bodhisattva.
Yes.
Which movie is there actually on the background?
I'm not sure that is mentioned. I'm not really sure that is even mentioned. They should be at least on the Pramudita, the first bhumi, because they are Aryas, But I didn't find that mentioned specifically. There's one text which mentions that they will take less amount of kalpas. Maybe 2 kalpas. They take 2 kalpas instead of 3, just like the Pratyeka Buddhas. For Pratyeka Buddhas is the same. They will also have to do the same thing. They will have to take up the Bodhisattva path, and then only later they can become Buddhas and be outside of samsara. But this I didn't think about. You should check. Should we kill mosquitoes? Yeah. If there are mosquitoes in a room, we're not supposed to kill them. We are supposed to find a way maybe to make them go away. That's better. But I think that if we take up prana, tipata, virati, and then whenever a mosquito bites us, we do like this, that's not very good. You have to think, this is your mother. If your mother comes and gives you a small bite, you don't crush her. You just tell her, what are you doing? So, I know it's, that's why I was saying, the Buddhist, this is not even Mahayana teaching, this is just basic, the first vow. Buddhist teachings sometimes are counterintuitive. So even not killing mosquitoes is an issue. But we're not supposed to. Yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem. I understand it. Like ants. This is also a problem. What if ants invade your kitchen? Then what to do? And it's a problem. One should try to find some way, if possible, to make the ants go away without killing them. First of all, prevent them from coming. Keep the kitchen clean. And then try to find a way. But we have to reflect. We shouldn't take lightly killing insects. It's also killing. Insects also want to live. They're not happy if we kill them. So, yes, it's true, it's not considered the same level of non-virtue as killing a human being. That's true. But still, we are not keeping the vow perfectly when we kill a mosquito. And we have to think of why. Some cases are more understandable. Like, for example, there are cases where in some areas they kill mosquitoes because they bring malaria or dengue fever. Different issue. But sometimes people just kill mosquitoes because they are annoying. And that's something one should think about carefully. That, I think, it would be a big stretch to say that that's okay. I don't think it's okay. I don't know teachers who say it's okay. In fact, there's even in one chapter of Shantideva's text where we are encouraged to bear with the bites of different insects as a training towards the perfection of forbearance. If we train that kind of small forbearance, then we will be able to get very great forbearance. Then we will not even feel anything wrong when people do something very wrong to us, when they cut our fingers away, and ultimately we will have the forbearance that all dharmas have known a reason, which means that's the same as the realization of emptiness. So yes, we are supposed to train ourselves to value all forms of life and to avoid killing them. Yeah, I'm sorry if it's bad news, But basically we are not supposed to kill mosquitoes. We're not supposed to kill snakes. If we encounter a poisonous snake, we're not supposed to kill it. We are supposed to make sure that we can remove that snake but not kill it. So it's not, that's why I was saying earlier, actually practicing virtue is difficult, and very often we don't know that certain activities are non-virtuous. We might think, if I have a snake in my house, it's very dangerous, it's reasonable to kill it. But that's non-virtue. We're not supposed to do it. At least this is my understanding. This is what my teachers told me. Maybe you can find some Buddhist teachers who tells you, you can kill as many mosquitoes as you want, but I don't know any yet. Yes. Right. Yeah. That's true. It's, but that's why it's. I was saying it's always a matter of reducing virtue. So I was saying, if somebody is killing mosquitoes because they endanger the life of many sentient beings, then it's a slightly different case. It still involves non-virtue. This is one point we have to understand. When bodhisattvas even take up upaya, they know that maybe that is going to send them to hell for some time. They don't care. If they take up a non-virtue, knowing that it will avoid suffering, more suffering for sentient beings, they don't care that they are going to suffer themselves. So if one can do it in that way, then there are some exceptions, especially for bodhisattvas, which even allow killing of humans. Very famous case is the captain of a ship. You know that story of the captain of a ship who foresees that the person who is going to come into the ship is going to kill all the people on the ship. Then what does, and that person too is going to hell by doing that. So what does the captain of a ship do? He kills that person. And he knows that by killing him, there's enough non-virtue to go to hell. But he doesn't care, doesn't think about it twice. So this. Yes, I know, but but that's not the. Yes, it's true in the sense that in this case too, when the bodhisattva goes to hell for this action, in the end he stays there a very short time, just a moment. And while in hell, the bodhisattva doesn't suffer, the bodhisattva just feels compassion for the sentient beings. So that's also true, and that's for that reason. But we shouldn't think about that. So in a sense, we should be ready. If we do non-virtue for the sake of reducing other people's sentient beings, I don't think we are encouraged to do it by thinking, anyhow, I'm not going to suffer much. That's not the idea. We should think that we don't care if we're going to suffer, and we should think that it's really a last resort. And usually, it is said the people who can do that are people with clairvoyance. You see, they should see, for example, the captain of the ship should be able to see that that person is going to kill all of them. So it's not for ordinary people to take up non-virtue for the sake of reducing suffering. There are cases where it is obvious, okay, there are some obvious cases. But in most cases, it is not encouraged. It's not something that one is encouraged to do lightly. Like, And some cases maybe we cannot be 100% sure. We work on probabilities. That's also true. Like there are cases where we're not even 100% sure whether our behavior produces more virtue or more non-virtue. But we take a chance. I had a friend, actually he happens to be the secretary of the head of the Jikun Kagyu school. So I know that the Jikun Kyabgon came here, Chedzon Rinpoche, and he was the secretary, but at that time he was still a student, and he was known in the university where he studied because he was a very good friend of dogs who were very sick. So what he would do, even at some risk for himself, because they were stray dogs and sometimes they could bite, when he saw a dog that had a very great skin disease, he took the dog and gave them injections. Actually, many of the skin diseases that dogs have can be easily cured with some injection. But he was telling me, actually, ultimately, I don't know whether it's virtue or non-virtue, because through this injection, I'm killing many sentient beings that are living off this dog. So, not 100% sure. But this is more or less the way in which most of us have to operate. This is a point of pramana, actually. Pramana means means of valid knowledge. Most of our actions are based on probability, not certainty. The example given for that is farmers. When the farmers plant the seed of rice, are they sure that after a few months they'll get rice? No, they're not sure. Why? Many things can happen in between. If there is a flood, if there is not enough rain, there's lots of things that can happen in between to prevent that rice from growing. But they know that it's probable that if I put the seed, the rice is going to grow. So, evaluating the probability, we take up a certain course of action. For most of us, it's like that. If we observe, even in terms of taking up Buddhist practice, etc., most of the Buddhist teachings, even the teachings on rebirth, etc., for most of us is a question of probability. There are many things that we are unable to really completely, directly realize or see for ourselves, but we see that, okay, it makes sense. It seems the most probable thing I know. Even if I'm not 100% certain, this seems to be the best course of action. And this is usually how most of our behavior works. They give the example even at the beginning of a text. Again, it's a kind of absurd example in a way, but it's just to give us an idea. They say that there is this tradition of telling the subject matter at the beginning of a text, because this way we know that the text is worthwhile taking up. And then somebody asks, if somebody tells you that they're going to speak about something, like here, the first verse says, I'm going to speak of how to engage in the Bodhisattva path. How do you know that he's really going to do that? Maybe he's going to talk about something else, so you're not certain, don't read it. But of course, it's not very common that somebody tells you, I'm going to speak about this in a text, and then they talk about something completely different. It's not so common, so at least we know that it's quite probable that he's going to talk about this. And we take up the learning of the rest of the text on the basis of that probability. So similarly, I think, in many cases, we engage in a certain action with a sense that the virtue outweighs the non-virtue. And this is something that it's always quite difficult. One of the first Buddhist teachings I went to was by Samdong Rinpoche. Samdong Rinpoche used to be the prime minister of a Buddhist parliament in exile, the Buddhist government in exile. And he was the director of the Central Tibetan University. And his teaching was on Shila, Samadhi, Prajna. And he gave a very, very strong emphasis on discipline. One point that he made was that he was saying, if we want to have good Shila in terms of ahimsa, non-harming, said vegetarianism is great. If you can be vegetarian, it's very helpful. But he also said, actually, almost all our activities involve the suffering of others. And he said, reducing our consumerism in some ways is more important than vegetarianism. Because if we observe where many of the products that we buy come from, many of them cause very great suffering, not even just to animals, but to human beings as well. So when we consume a lot, it can be a lot of non-virtue. And normally we don't think that is the case. Like, if usually we don't reflect about it. We don't reflect too much about where our products come from. But we are always involved in a certain amount of harm. And in the end, we just have to accept that, and we have to at least not have the intention to harm, and always have the intention to reduce that harm as much as possible and increase the virtue. This is the difference between, for example, Buddhist and Jaina. Jainas actually, in the end, try not to eat even. And when they walk, they actually sweep in front of them to remove all the insects, for example. So for the Jaina, because for the Jaina, one gets demerit whether one has an intention or whether one doesn't have an intention. But for the Buddhist, it depends from intention. So this is the difference. In the end, we might produce all the time a certain amount of harm. Like when we walk, how many sentient beings do we crush? Every time we take a walk, we probably crush millions of sentient beings which we don't see. But what should we do? We at least pay a little bit of attention, and we try to avoid crushing the ones that we can see. This much we are able to do, and otherwise we become paralyzed. And otherwise we just wait to die. And that's what Vaginas do. Vagina practice is actually slowly starving oneself until one dies. For them, that's a good practice. But that's not the Buddhist path. Because for the Buddhist path, intention is the point. So, in respect to Shila, we can never expect to have a perfect Shila. In some sense, it's really very unlikely. It's very, very unlikely that our life will be completely harmless to others, I think. At least that I'm convinced of Venerable Samdong Rinpoche's argument. I'm quite convinced. And also, our condition usually is that we have a certain amount of non-virtue in our lives. There's several examples of that. Like, there's the example of the butcher who could not take even the first precept completely. Why? Because his family's livelihood depended from that. So what he did is that he took it halfway. He took the precept so that he said, I am never going to kill at night. So during the day he would be a butcher, killing sentient beings, and at night he would keep the vow of not killing. And if I remember correctly, the result of that was that he was born in, when he died, he was born in a very beautiful island. And he went there in the evening. He was welcomed by, I think 5, but I don't remember now the number, extremely beautiful goddesses who just pleased him in any possible way for the whole night. Very nice, like a small heaven. In the morning, they turned into ferocious dogs and they ate him alive. And this went on every day for a very, very long time. So that's an example. In his case, he had to find a way. He still did something good in a way, but he was not able to remove all his non-virtue. So this is, I think for many people, that's more or less the situation. Like if we think, if we are selling something, how many times are we going to tell exactly the defects of that product? How many businessmen you know that actually go and tell you very directly that, oh, this product is very good, but I should tell you that in this area the other company is better. I don't think that's very common, but so let's say at least white lies are pretty common, and we all engage in that kind of behavior, I think, to some extent, one way or the other. So we have to become more and more mindful and understand, try to find skillful ways to reduce it. So for example, mosquitoes. If you find that you think, I don't know, your relatives are in danger because they will get dengue fever from the mosquitoes, and you kill the mosquitoes, is one thing. If you're outside, you get a mosquito, it bites you, and you just kill it because it's annoying, that's completely different. So at least one can already try to differentiate between those cases and try to reduce. I think there are ways in which we also know whether we are engaging in a small non-virtue because it's really crucial, or whether we are doing it because we just don't think it's so important. It's just a mosquito after all, and if we kill it, it's not a big deal. So also we have to remember that the modern ideas about what constitutes a living being, etc., and the Buddhist idea are very different. That's really quite different. This is something we have to keep in mind. Like the ascension being is a sentient being even when the sentient being is very simple. It doesn't depend on how complex their brains are. That's a completely modern idea. But from a Buddhist perspective, the mind is not the brain. And therefore, we have to take very great care. Yeah, did I answer your question? If you have an action which is not preceded by an intention, that action does not produce karma. However, it's a bit more complicated because in certain cases, we also know that even though we don't have the intention at that moment, we knew beforehand that we could have prevented that, and we didn't do it. So it becomes a little bit more complicated, maybe. Then, when one has an intention, let's say one has an intention to kill, that's already negative karma, but it's not comparable to actually killing someone. If we actually kill somebody, then that's the complete karma of killing. In fact, there's even a difference in terms of the heaviness of karma. If we want to kill one person and by mistake we kill the other one, another one, that's not the same level of negative karma, actually. Because there is a slight mismatch between our intention and our activity. But when we have the intent to kill somebody, and we actually succeed in killing that person, then we have completed that action, and then we get the heaviest karma. Both of them get negative karma, the judge gets more. No. That person also has the intent to kill. Yeah. That person knows fully well that the person is going to die. So he also has an intention to kill, although he's been ordered, but nevertheless. But at least if I remember correctly, I should check again, but usually it is said that if you order somebody else to kill and that person kills successfully, you get even more negative karma. So, yeah. Yes. Yes. Well. Yeah. Well, the main point is that there's no such thing as a happy life. so that's maybe the point. Or you could say that understanding that will give us a happier life, in the sense that in most cases it is said that in some sense, sometimes if we start practicing seriously, we might even face more hardship. But it's a matter of developing more insight into that hardship, because then we can transform that hardship. We don't feel so much that those are obstacles or difficulties. We rather feel that these are good opportunities. And even if they give us a certain amount of, let's say, physical discomfort, we are able to face them with a serene mind, because we know the value of that discomfort. We know that that discomfort is going to get rid of a much greater discomfort for us, and if we have Bodhicitta, for many others. It's I don't know, let me think if I can find an example for Bodhicitta. Let's say we have a child, small child, our own child. The child is 2 years old. The child is dying. And somebody tells us that if you donate blood to your child is going to live. Donating blood is not pleasant, but it won't cross our mind that that's a problem. When we donate the blood, we feel very happy. So if we develop bodhicitta, we should get a similar mindset that the difficulties we face are actually for the sake of eventually benefiting all sentient beings, which are like our only child. And the more we develop that mindset, the easier it becomes. That's why it is said it goes from happiness to happiness. Because then we can observe all those cases of physical discomfort as actually opportunities, causes and conditions that make us closer to the ability of helping others. So when we get that kind of more altruistic mindset, then it's quite easy. Even just with naishkramya, with the wish to go out of samsara, we already can avoid taking too seriously our discomforts. And also understand the value of a discomfort. Understand that temporary discomfort is a way to avoid much greater discomfort in future. So if sometimes it is said that when we practice we encounter some difficulties, which mean that we have a certain pain or discomfort, but it's a kind of purification of past karma which otherwise could have matured in a much more severe manner. And much of a discomfort that we take up has that purpose as well. It's a way of reducing our negative karma by letting it mature in a way that is a bit less severe than could be if it was not joined to our practice. So in that case also we feel like it's okay. And also another way to become more tolerant of that is to read the life stories of great practitioners. If you read the life stories of great practitioners, usually you find some of them, of course, there's very exceptional cases where from beginning to end it's almost without any difficulty. But most of them, if you check, you will find that they encounter a lot of difficulty, like very major difficulties, and they manage. And actually, it is partly thanks to those difficulties that in the end they can obtain even great realization in one lifetime. So sometimes that's a very useful thing to do. We read the lives of past masters to see that actually the discomfort that we normally take up is kind of small. Well, I don't know, but usually compared to what the masters of the past used to do, it's not so common for people to take up such things. In most Buddhist tradition I know that is the case. Even if you read the life of, if I understand correctly, Venerable Webu's teacher's teacher, Shu Yung, if you read his life story, you will see that he underwent quite significant hardship. I think he was even beaten up very badly at the age of more than 100. There's a story about that. You should check it. Like I read it long ago. I don't remember it very well. But this was one of the most respected Chinese monks at his time. And at one time, some governor ordered his guards to beat him up. And he was already more than 100. Still, he was okay. And apparently, even Mao got upset when he found out that they got him beat him up. So, this is to say, these were already a great realized master, and still he has to undergo certain hardship. Arhats. If you check the life of some arhats, sometimes they have to. There's some karma that they still haven't purified, and some of them are beaten up. And that purifies something that they did long, long ago that otherwise would have matured in a different way. So that would be my suggestion, to understand this idea that hardship is good. If we read the lives of past masters, we can become more inspired. Like one very famous case, although frankly speaking that's a secret mantra life story, so it doesn't really concern the text we are studying. But if you happen to read the life of Milarepa, for example, you can get some idea. Like Milarepa is a nice example because he started as somebody who did very huge non-virtue. So other people, other life stories sometimes are not so extreme, but in the case of Milarepa, he started by doing something amazingly bad, thinking that it was good. Why? His mother told him. So that's the problem with always listening to one's parents. His mother told him to do something which was really bad, actually. And he didn't know. He didn't know any better. He thought the best thing to do is to listen to his mother. He did it. And then he had to undergo a very great hardship in order to obtain his results. But those can be, usually those things are inspiring. Yeah. Insight, I just mean that, well, even just reflecting on the value of the wish to go out of samsara and bodhicitta, and then we understand that this requires certain practices. These practices also have to do with interacting with hardship. And therefore, hardship is an occasion to practice. It's not just something annoying. When we have a hardship, if we don't have this broader perspective, we just look at it in the moment or in terms of our selfish interest to avoid something unpleasant. But if we have a broader perspective, especially if we have the perspective of the six perfections, whatever happens is an opportunity to practice the six perfections. And sometimes, if we don't encounter that hardship, we cannot practice certain perfections. It's more difficult to do. So of course, it doesn't mean we should look for hardship. That may be no need. But if hardship comes, as happens to most of us, then we shouldn't get overwhelmed, we shouldn't panic, and rather we should try to, as best as we can, apply our practice of the six perfections, especially of kshanti, of the perfection of forbearance. Forbearance means also the ability to put up with hardship. We always have to put up with hardship, even when we practice, let's say, want to practice shamatha and vipassana. our physical position itself might give us a certain amount of hardship. So we bear with it, of course, not to the point of harming our body, but that's also an element of kshanti, to give an example. So that's what I meant by insight. I didn't mean really a very, very high realization. I meant just a broader perspective, which when something happens, we look at it always from the perspective of our practice, not from the perspective of our worldly interests. When we encounter hardship with a worldly mentality, then of course we will become very much affected. So when we make the list of the 8 worldly dharmas that one should have equanimity towards, or neutrality, one is pleasure and pain. So when we decide to practice, we should immediately develop a kind of neutrality. We shouldn't be too happy when we are in a pleasant situation. We shouldn't be too dejected when we are in an unpleasant situation. Rather, we should understand that both of them are within samsara. So actually, both of them ultimately have the nature of suffering. And we should develop sufficient broad perspective and space within our mind that it's not so much affected. So basically, always being as much as possible mindful of one's practice, I think, is going to help. How do we become mindful of our practice? By reflecting its value, by knowing why we are practicing. That's why the teachings, if we are Mahayana practitioners, first we have to develop Naishkramya, the wish to go out of samsara. We have to become more and more convinced that anything within samsara is not going to give us even a tiny bit of happiness. We don't look for happiness in that anymore. And then develop bodhicitta. Then we know why we are practicing. When we know why we are practicing and we value it, then it becomes much easier to become mindful of our practice at all times. I gave you the example of a child that is dying. Well, that's a good example. If we are in that situation, probably throughout the day, we are thinking of our child who is dying, and throughout the day, whenever we have an opportunity to make that child feel a little bit better or to find more causes and conditions for the child's recovery, whatever is available, we're going to do it. We'll always have in mind that, if possible, even if it costs us some hardship. And so, in this case, we are developing the sense that all sentient beings are just like our only child, and that our practice is the medicine. So, you remember one of the things said about bodhicitta is that it is jagat dukkha aushadha. It's the medicine for the world's pain. So if we genuinely think that everyone is in great pain, if we genuinely think that everyone is like our own child, and if we genuinely think that bodhicitta is the remedy for the child's pain, then it's easier to develop it. It's easier to be mindful of it. The reason why during the day we don't think much about it, it's because we have not trained our mind in that way. We're not really convinced that everyone is like our only child. It's not very intuitive, because normally this is not the type of connection that we have to other people in this lifetime. So that means that we are thinking a lot about our present lifetime. That also means we don't have much renunciation. We don't have much naishkramya. So it all indicates that we have not trained ourselves much. So that's the insight that I was referring to. And the only thing to do is that we have to reflect on it again and again, develop these things through meditation, through reflection, through study, and also our behavior helps us, like throughout the day. Yeah, in that way the hardships will not be so overwhelming. Yeah, did it answer your question? Okay, welcome. Any other questions? Yes. Yes. Pratimoksha vow is of different classes, and also it differs slightly depending on which Vinaya lineage one is following. Now, in our case, now there's no monk or nun in the room. That means we're all upasaka and upasika. So that means it should cover the refuge vow. Refuge vow also usually comes with certain secondary vows connected to it. Some of them have to do with respecting even the representations of a Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So we have to have a certain behavior to any representation of a Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. We have to be respectful. So, for example, we shouldn't put any representation of the three jewels on the ground. And whenever we see even a very small piece of a monk robe, we should treasure it. And of course, the Buddha statues, we have to treat them very respectfully. And also is a matter of commitment to the three jewels as being our refuge. So, for example, we're not supposed to prostrate to worldly gods like Narayana, Ishvara, etc. We're not supposed to prostrate to deities which are within samsara. And there are a few other secondary vows. And we have to take up some of the Shila Samvara, the restraints of discipline. And I believe the very minimum is to take one vow. So, there's Panchashila, at least we have to try to take one. Ideally, we should have taken 5. Or some people take 8, some people take 10, depending from the person. Sometimes we can take Uposhada, which means on certain specific days, we can take temporary vows, like 8 vows or 10 vows, just for 24 hours. And then one can take up the other vows, such as Shramanera or Shramaneri. And then in certain traditions, for females, there is an intermediate vow called Shikshamana. And then Bhikshu and Bhikshuni are the highest Pratimoksha, where the number of vows is very, very great. Basically, one has to take one level of Pratimoksha, whichever it is, and that's the basic vow. On top of that, if one takes the Bodhicitta vow, then one becomes a Mahayana practitioner. Within the Mahayana, there are 2 subdivisions. The next subdivision, I was telling you, one is called the method of the paramitas, one is called the mantra method. If on top of Bodhicitta, one takes, let's say, now you all know there are what they call empowerments, actually means sprinkling, abhisheka. If one on top of that, one takes an abhisheka, there are certain vows connected to that, and then one also is practicing that set of vows. Those are 3 sets of vows, and they're all connected. However, the first vows are the most fundamental. So one example is if you have an iron ball, a ball of iron, that's like the Pratimoksha vow. If on top of that you have the Bodhisattva vows, that becomes like a beautiful silver ball, sorry. And if on top of that you get the special vows of Mantranaya, then that becomes golden. But the point of this example is, if you don't have the Pratimoksha vows, there is no ball in the first place. So there is no talk of silver or golden. So the Pratimoksha vows are crucial. The development of the wish to go out of samsara is crucial, is what makes our practice genuine practice. Without that, all the rest cannot be there. So this is a point which is often emphasized, and that's the role of the Pratimoksha in this, if we want the context of the whole Buddhist teaching.